Id or Yid?
Welcome to our Positively Biased class. This is our weekly discussion on the book by Positively Biased by Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson. And our guests are Major Jeff Sachs, U.S. Army retired, 25-year veteran of the Chicago Police Force, and currently the National Commander of the Jewish War Veterans. And Dr. Zev Elias, U.S. Air Force.
In this corner.
And in this corner, yes, retired neurosurgeon, 38 years in ER Trauma 1. And there's me. But we have some good conversations. So we're up to the chapter that's entitled, Who is a Good Jew? Chapter 4. But I would say that this is more like that conversation of who am I, right? And we talked last week about Viktor Frankl's work on man's quest for meaning, man's search for meaning, and those type of things. And in so many ways, our lives are a personal answer to that most existential of questions of who am I? What am I? And I think that's the big question to discuss tonight. And as we dive into the question, the essence of the question, it comes like there's a story someone had written to the Rebbe and said that he felt hypocritical to go to shul on Yom Kippur when he doesn't go to shul the rest of the year.
That was actually a very good part of this chapter, I thought.
And so what's your thought on this topic?
Oh, I used to be one of those Jews that would go. I was a 3-day-a-year guy, and I thought it was hypocritical too. But then I read what he said and I said, yeah, he's kind of right. You're supposed to be in shul, and the rest of the year is when you're wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. So it really comes back to who we really are. And I think what's important about this chapter is defining the essence while at the same time acknowledging humanity. We're just human, right? So that quality comes back to, we say, who are you? Who's the essence of you? What are you really all about? And according to the Rebbe, being Jewish means that fulfilling the mitzvah, doing the mitzvahs, acts of goodness and kindness and all the other mitzvahs, that's the natural thing. That's the natural default position. Anything else is just part of the fact that we're in gullus, and it's not part of who we really are. And to the Rebbe, this Jewish neshama, at its healthiest, at its most fulfilled, is in total alignment with Torah. And this is indeed the Jew's most natural state of vitality. Anything else is actually a stress on the system. And accordingly, the note here says the Rebbe worked like a spiritual chiropractor, adjusting people along the way, right? But what experience can you think of this idea of people think they're hypocritical in doing one or two mitzvahs, and how they get through with that?
I'm sorry?
How do you live with that feeling? If you think you're being hypocritical?
Yeah, I go back. I think the basis of Judaism is what Hillel told the convert who was asked him, I'll convert to Judaism if you tell me everything on, when I'm standing on one foot. And the answer he gave is treat your neighbor, love your neighbor as yourself. The rest is commentary, go study. I think that's a beautiful thing, and that's certainly the basis for a lot of it. There's, you get into, and then you start getting into these controversies. What comes first, faith or mitzvahs? Do you have to have faith first before you engage in mitzvahs, or does doing the mitzvahs bring you faith? And so,
both, I think it builds on each other.
Sure, but each mitzvah that you perform is independent of any other. So I've had friends tell me, I would talk to them about start off lighting Shabbat candles. You can put on tefillin in 5 minutes or less. It really doesn't take a lot of time of your day. And they say, well, I don't want to do this I don't want to do this step until I do this step, and then after I'll do this step. It's really, it's not like that. And while it's tough if you haven't been doing it your entire life, to swallow it all the mitzvahs at one time. You know, like Confucius said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. You got to start somewhere.
You reminded me of a story by Rabbi Shmuel Lew of London. And I'll only share part of the story because it's a lengthy story, but he was out. This is years and years ago. He was out in the month of Elul. He would go with the yeshiva bachram out to the cemetery because the month before Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, people would go to the cemetery and visit family members in the cemetery. And so they'd go out with a mitzvah tank and they'd be looking to put on tefillin with anyone who was, came there. And so he walks up to this guy he doesn't know, and he says, "You want to put on tefillin?" And the guy says, No, I don't want to put on tefillin. It's okay. And he starts talking with the guy, and this guy puts on tefillin. Eventually, the guy puts on tefillin. And Rabbi Lew wanted to get his address so that he could put him on a mailing list for brochures about the holidays and things like that. And so he asked the guy, "What's your address?" And he gave him his address. And Rabbi Lew said, "You live down the block from me. We're literally on the same block. I tell you what, I'll come over on Sundays and we'll put on tefillin every Sunday. 5 minutes, I'll just come over, we'll put on tefillin." And the guy says, "No, I would feel a hypocrite putting on tefillin on a regular basis without really, knowing what it's all about and knowing all these things. It just wouldn't feel right." And Rabbi Lew says, "You know what? We'll learn for an hour and then we'll put on tefillin." And the guy said, no, okay, 5 minutes. We'll do the 5 minutes. But one mitzvah leads into another. They all lead one thing into a train of other things. But if we're coming with the premise that doing the mitzvahs is the most natural thing, that's the healthiest thing, that's the norm, then doing one is not hypocritical at all. And not doing others excuse me, is really just part of the journey. Start with this one, and like you were saying, another one will come with time. But it's a journey.
I mean, we're all on different, we're all, if you look at it either as a road or a ladder, if you will, however you choose to look at it, everybody's on a different part of the road or a different rung of the ladder in terms of their spirituality. As long as you're moving forward, climbing upwards on the ladder, you're making progress, however slow that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There was a letter written to a youngster who the youngster had informed the Rebbe of his upcoming bar mitzvah. And the Rebbe responded with the brachas for the bar mitzvah. But the Rebbe also said, regarding that which you write, that you stem from a secular family. And certainly the secularness is an ancillary condition and an external garment that covers your essence and core. For every member of the family is the son of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, a daughter of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and have been for tens of generations followers of Torah and mitzvahs. God gave man choice with regard to his actions. However, he cannot whatsoever change the essence, the core of his truest nature. And that bedrock disposition is ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim, that we are children, believers, the children of believers. And I think that's a fascinating insight, is to say, if you realize where we're coming from, we've been through ups and downs, but the Romans have come and gone, the Greeks have come and gone. I'll play on the British a little bit. The British Empire has come and gone. But yeah, here we are, as
we're still around, but
who's the I'm skipping senior moment here. Who wrote Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn?
Mark Twain.
Thank you. So as Mark Twain wrote in his article, Harper's Journal, December issue 1899, he wrote an article called Concerning the Jews. And he says that, and here we are, showing no infirmities, no weakness, still at it after all these years.
Actually, that was one of the articles that helped form the Jewish war veterans. Because of our previous article, he actually, in that later article, he recognized the fact that Jews had served in the Civil War because he had been corrected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it made him look at us a little bit.
Yeah. So I think, how does that, if we see the big picture of our heritage over the last few thousand years, how does that affect the daily decision of whether or not to do a mitzvah?
You know, sometimes I forget that that when we say doing mitzvahs, we're talking about the 613 commandments. And I always think of mitzvahs as a good deed. Yes, the what God has commanded us are good deeds, but I above and beyond that, I suppose, is what I look at as a mitzvah. Sometimes.
Yeah. And the shorish, the root of the word mitzvah, is tzav, a command. But it also means a connector. So it's all of these things that God commanded us is what connects us to him.
So I look at mitzvahs as stuff that we should be doing every day. And but there are certain things that are above that. I mean, like we talk about a mitzvah that can't be repaid by when we help bury the dead.
Right.
Well, we don't know what the reward is for any mitzvah. It's not laid out there for us to understand, you know, what they're about. The easiest mitzvah to observe is not to take a bird from the nest and, you know, when its mother's there. The hardest mitzvah is kaved es avicha v'esimecha. That's perhaps the hardest. So you don't know what the reward is for either one, except, you know, it says in the Shema, so you'll live long and prosper, and your fields will do well, and all this stuff.
Yes.
But we don't know individually how many brownie points you get for each mitzvah, and who's keeping score.
Well, and I wonder if also it's also dependent on who it is. In other words, I think some mitzvahs are easier for others and harder for others. And so it may be, you know, there's one commentary that talks about how do you know which is the one mitzvah you need to really concern yourself with? It's the one you keep trying to shy away from because it's the hardest. And that may be the one you really have to, you know, that may be yours.
Oh, so you're going to make me put tefillin on, huh? And do it on my own. It's not bad to have somebody assist you, but I always get tangled up in it.
A little bit of practice, right?
Yeah.
But again, going back to the idea of if this is essentially who we are, how does that make a difference in getting around to doing them?
Well, it's a tradition. You saw your mother light candles on Shabbos. You're more likely to light candles than if you didn't see your mother. You see your father davening and putting on tefillin, you're more likely to put on tefillin. So there is a tradition that carries on from generation to generation. And I think one of the things that distinguishes us as Jews is we place a high priority, and there are other cultures that are starting to recognize this, the importance of education. And part of that education is learning about the mitzvahs.
Actually, I found my grandfather's tefillin in the basement, and I had grown up Reform, and I had no idea what it was, and I had to ask my father, "What is this?" And obviously, it was not in condition to wear, but then I realized that my family had actually put on tefillin in the past. My great grandfather did, and his kippah, although it was falling apart, you know, it was all in a little tallis bag. It was quite a little find.
In my personal experience, my father did not have and did not put on. His father may have years ago. When it came to my bar mitzvah in a Reformed congregation, I wasn't even asked, "Do you want to do that?" I was asked, "Do you want to do a tallis?" And I didn't even know what the tallis was.
Right.
But I think the same thing goes back though, even if it's not your father or your grandfather or your mother or your grandmother, knowing that this has been a Jewish thing for a couple thousand years, it skips a couple generations here and there, but it doesn't, it's still yours, right? It still belongs to you. I remember watching Fiddler on the Roof and having such an affinity to Tevye. And it was like, it was kind of weird, but no, yeah, I get that. That's me.
Well, the Rebbe says we all have a spark inside of us, and we're just waiting to ignite the flame.
Right.
So whatever incident it might be for any of us, whatever event occurs, then that spark is still there potentially to light the flame.
Yeah, and that's
the
exactly.
Flame pushes away the darkness.
Yeah, every mitzvah creates another candle, which pushes away more of the darkness, and you come closer to it slowly but surely. Someone asked me, I ran into Chabad on campus when I was in college. And someone asked me, so how did you, why were you attracted to this? And I said, when I went for Chabad, to the Chabad house for Shabbos, and then went home with a family for meals and had a chance to spend some time with the people at the Chabad house and the family that I was staying with, it was like coming home to a place I'd never been before. Paraphrasing John Denver, right? But it was totally natural. It was totally coming home, even though I'd never been there before. In retrospect, my father did put on tefillin shortly after the Rebbe's campaign to put on tefillin began. We were visiting Israel in December of 68, January 69. And we have a photograph of my dad putting on tefillin at the Kaisel.
Oh, wow. So
there is a retrospect there that he did. But that was not a daily event at that time. There's a story here about, going back to this whole thing about psychology and the Freudian psychology of the time. And someone a professor had come to the Rebbe asking about, what's the natural state of things? And the Rebbe's response here, to use contemporary terminology, the conscious state of a Jew can be affected by external pressures that induce states of mind and even behavior that is contrary to his subconscious. So I know the Rebbe is using the terminology to help describe it, but obviously Torah has its own terminology here. But basically that, yes, you can be, by external things, you can be induced into doing behaviors that are not natural. When the external pressures are removed, it does not constitute a change or a transformation of the essential nature. On the contrary, it's just coming home to a place you've never been before. Just coming back to the natural state. The Rebbe
story of Avner in the chapter. The Avner.
Yes.
Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, and the story of Avner from the Talmud.
Yeah.
And the Rebbe brings out that later, the Rebbe brings out also that this guy actually, that the acronym shows a resh in front of it, initials, which means rabbi or Reb Avner. So actually, here was this simple guy, but the Talmud gives great credence to the fact that this was a godly soul. May not have behaved that way at that time, but this is definitely a godly soul. And and there's a predisposition for holy things. Have you experienced that?
Not like in that Torah portion where I mean I've read the Torah code where you can actually it predicts patterns and things like that, and that was what that was about. I mean, his name is spelled out in a portion of this
And Chumash.
Yeah, but yeah.
But a personal experience of knowing you're going the right place, revealing something that's already part of you, but you had an experience.
That when I went to the the wall. I didn't feel that
Yeah.
there, but I sometimes I'll have a spiritual feeling sometimes, but not. So it's funny. I thought if I go to the Temple Mount, I'll have that feeling, and that wasn't where I got it. I looked around and it just it was more of a historic place for me.
Yeah.
I pray that God will rebuild Jerusalem and restore and come back to Jerusalem, but it wasn't there for me.
How was the experience of finding your father's tefillin?
That was interesting. It was all dry rotted, but I guess it was like never thought he'd never. That was not my father's tefillin. It was his grandfather's tefillin, my
Wow.
great grandfather's tefillin.
Wow.
And what it was doing in the basement, I was surprised to find it.
And what happened in that moment for you?
Just it was an epiphany that I came from a more religious family at one time.
Mm-hmm. That this is your inheritance. This is yours.
Or maybe I should learn a little bit more about my roots. Is what I took away from that. That was
Zev?
interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of a loaded question. There's many different ways to answer that. I think I could kind of give you two separate events that were kind of very striking for me. One is, we think about what does it mean to be a Jew, and different people look at it different ways. I look at it as part of being a part of something bigger.
Right.
And it's certainly in many respects, I think people who are in the military should be able to identify, with that concept.
Right.
There's the concept of tradition. And, that's where the kotel, I think, really hits home. Just to be in the presence of that area, and then not far away is the city of David, which is it's incredible. And we just read the Haftorah last week, where David was ruled for 40 years and 7 in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem. So he was there, and you read about Shlomo and all that. So there's the tradition. But I think also, Jeff, as you allude to, honoring and remembering your family. So, my father was a Holocaust survivor, never talked about anything. And the only time I ever found out about his past, or even my grandparents, my grandfather, who also perished at Auschwitz, was when they gave, they recorded a tape for Spielberg. That's the only time I ever heard anything.
Mm-hmm.
And my uncle actually had a longer interview than my father did, and I learned for the first time anything about my grandfather, who was a shoemaker, very religious. And my father was a yeshiva bucher, but once he was taken to work camps, he lost, aside from losing his relatives, lost a lot of faith in the process.
Very challenging times.
So we discussed that in the past. So you look at, so there's two aspects for me. One is the tradition, and one is honoring one's relatives that I look at, I think, are very important.
Right.
Components and other reasons to be observant, aside from just the mitzvahs.
Which speaks back to this idea that the Rebbe, that's brought up in the book here, about an inheritance. An inheritance is yours not by anything that you've done. An inheritance belongs to you because you are who you are, and therefore it's yours. And you don't, all you need to do is step up and claim it. I think that's an important part of the deeper understanding of, that every Jewish neshama, this is yours. This is your heritage. Here he talks about the idea that depending on what you're looking for, that's what you find. So, if you're looking for positive things, you find the positive things. If you're looking for negative things, you find the negative things. If you're reading the papers, it's all negative, right? or I was gonna say, not even papers nowadays, the digital stuff, because that's what they're selling, right? But if you're looking at a Jew and you're looking at that person and you're saying, this is the grandson of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, in that context, every Jew is a holy Jew, is a very special person. A chelik elikam imal mamash, a part of God's essence. And so if we focus on the positive, doesn't matter what their behavior is right now. We're in gullus. I have a friend of mine who was, when I was teaching, he was in one of my youth clubs years and years ago. And he was a fun-loving troublemaker, right? But he was from a divorce home, and his grandmother still went on cruises with boyfriends, and his mother was still smoking pot and doing other drugs. And like, what did you want from this 12-year-old? What expectations would you have from this kid? You expect him to be a troublemaker. That's because the environment he's in. But if you see him as a tired of neshama, a sweet soul, a godly soul, he's stuck in gullus, you can still have high expectations. And he can live up to them. But are we looking at the negative or are we looking at the positive? How are we going to see that?
That's interesting thought there. Yeah.
Any experience with seeing someone accomplish something you never could imagine that person was going to come out with?
I don't know if I told you the story about, when I was in 8th grade, my art teacher signed my yearbook, something to the effect that for somebody who's trying to be somebody but never will.
Ooh.
And I got to tell you, that inspired me. That was always in the back of my mind when I was struggling and I was trying to.
I wonder if he did that to do that to you.
Yeah, I don't think he wasn't that smart. I'm not seeing it that way. Sorry.
Well, you've certainly come a long way since the yearbook.
Just a vindictive kind of guy, but anyway.
It's interesting. I'm reading a book called Grit, where it talks about, talent. Talent's a good thing. Talent's an important thing. But grit, probably twice as important. And so someone got your goat and you stuck to it.
Yeah, but there's a midrash from you look at when we give the brachas on Friday evening to the girls and to the boys, and parents bless their children. For the girls, who do we talk about? We talk about Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. They all came from heathen families, and yet there are imahot, there are mothers. So why don't we have the comparable one for the boys? Why do we got Ephraim and Manasseh? Because they too were born in Egypt. They came from a heathen environment, even though they were raised Jewish. So the midrash was, look at what they accomplished. You never would have thought, based on their backgrounds, that they would have turned out that way. And that's why we honor them by blessing our children.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I have to say that even watching my own children, I'm actually pretty impressed that they're maturing. And my son in the Air Force, I can remember when he was just a basic airman, and I thought to myself, he's just as bad as any soldier I've ever run into. But he just got accepted into medical school, physician's assistant school. I shouldn't call it medical school, but and then the Navy's paying for it. He's leaving the Air Force to join the Navy to do this. But I'm just so impressed that he's doing that, following a dream.
That's great.
Now, if I can develop a little spirituality into these children, I'll be a happy camper.
Well, they'll do their own journey. You can set an example, but they'll do their own journey. We can't really control them. Yeah. So if we're taking this premise that every Jew is a godly neshama, an actual chelik elikam imal mamish, an actual part of God's essence, so how could it come that people could actually go against God's decrees? How could someone, get involved in negative stuff? How does that happen?
Oh, that's an interesting question. And since you brought it up, you better answer it because I don't have a good answer for that.
Well, speaking for myself, it's the chocolate cake.
What?
I struggle with my weight, and I've tried all kinds of different programs, but as my buddy, a physicist, he says, David, this is not rocket science. You burn more calories than you take in. That's all there is to it. There's nothing.
Oh yeah. I have an app for that. Yeah.
But I think it's the fact that that's part of what we're here for. God gives us this challenge. He puts us in this environment, and we have needs that have to be met. And Shais Taub, Rabbi Taub, was I've been listening to his recordings on Shari B'tochen, the book of trust, the gate of trust, and it's from the book from a couple hundred years ago called Duties of the Heart, Chavos Levavos, Duties of the Heart. And he was talking about, plants do photosynthesis. They sit there and they get everything coming at them and they live on it. We ain't like that. You have to work. You have to go out. You have to do things. And even if the food was brought to you, you still have to put it in your mouth. You still have to chew it. So there's a process to all these things. In this physical world, and we have a physical body with physical needs, it gets distracted.
So environment is what you're saying?
Environment is certainly part of it. Absolutely part of it. The Torah says that, the Talmud says that, a Jew would never sin if not for a spirit of folly. What's the folly? The folly is he thinks that if I do this, it won't separate me from God. But it does. If we're going against, number one, if we're going directly against what God says, then obviously we're creating an uncomfortable situation in the relationship. I think back to the parent and child all the time. It's like kids do stuff impulsively, but it makes a dent in the relationship.
It's funny. I see it all through the Torah, by the way. I'm reading Kings in a Torah study group, and just we keep making the same mistakes over and over again, setting up, what do you call it?
Idols?
Well, yeah, false idols.
Altars.
Yeah.
Altars.
And our kings were astray too. Some of them. And we had prophets. It's interesting.
So what happened there?
Why do we go astray? That's the question.
Yeah.
Why do we create a golden calf? It's
I mean, you can go. I don't know. You can go straight because you want to take a shortcut.
Oh yeah. I guess you're right.
That's one way.
Sometimes.
Yeah. There's a candy bar over there. I could work 3 weeks to try afford to get the money to go buy that candy bar, or I could take it and have it now, or whatever item it is, your PlayStation or whatever it is that you covet at the moment.
Right.
I think with God, because God is such an intangible thing sometimes. We talked about this in a different class, but I could see where people might set up idols, I guess, and call it God, but I just prefer to say I can't understand this, and I prefer to keep looking for that truth. That's just where I'm at. But I guess I can see why people would make mistakes in the past.
Even if you read about some of the idols and how people pray to them, like Baal Peor,
Whoa.
I don't even want to say how
Yeah.
the duty was to worship that idol, but
Right. So it's interesting because I think we all have different taivas, different desires, and there's some basic ones that but predominantly there's a couple of big ones. And idolatry at one time was a huge taiva, a desire, but it was so overwhelming that the sages at some point, using Kabbalah, they basically destroyed that taiva, that desire. So it's really not it's not really possible for you and I to understand how someone would bow down to a rock or a piece of wood or what we have no relationship to that feeling that they succumb to, because we don't have that.
Right.
So for us, the most relevant taivas of our generation is fame and fortune, power.
Oh, there you go. Those are, and I look at that as false idols too.
Yeah. Those are the false idols of our time, and probably sexuality is also there, right in there. And so if we think about our own challenges in those areas, how come we can't control ourselves? So we can relate to others in other generations, or even people in our own time that, there's a term, I think it's a Christian term, but I think the term is there, but for the grace of God, go I, meaning I could have gone that way. I could have gone right there,
Yes.
I don't have that taiva. I don't have that desire. I don't have that shtus, but I've got my own. And I can relate to that, But it comes back to the idea that if no matter what the desire is, whether it's pleasures of the flesh or power or, whatever that taiva is, if we realize our intrinsic goodness, who we truly are, the person who we truly are is a neshama, a godly soul, trapped in a physical body, down a physical world, and the intention of the activity is to choose to do good, is to choose to build a relationship with God, then we can do that, and it's not unnatural for us to do so. It's just uncovering the nature that's already within us. The Rebbe talks sometimes about the distinctions between something inscribed on parchment versus something which is engraved. If it's written on parchment, the ink and the parchment, they're combined. They're two separate things that are combined. But it can, with time, wear. If something is engraved, then all you have to do is remove the shmutz that's gathered on top of it, and then it's 100% where it was.
That's why Torahs have to be restored occasionally.
Right. So the neshama is more like that engraved piece. It is who we are. And any shmutz on top of that, that's just our own shtus, our own nonsense, our own folly.
We talk about the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob that was in near the end of this chapter. There's a lot of Jews who don't know they are Jews, I would say.
Yep. Or don't know what that means anyway.
Yes, that's true. They might ethically know that they're Jewish, but there's people that don't even ethically know that they're Jewish.
Right.
And then the question is, who is a Jew? So.
Yeah.
When I was in Poland about I think 6 years ago on a March of the Living, and we met with the chief rabbi of Poland in Warsaw, and he told many stories where people were raised Christian, and on their deathbed, their mothers told them that they were Jewish. Then the rabbi gets into a dilemma. So now what do you do you have someone who's halakhically Jewish but has been raised a Christian their entire lives. Do you try to bring them around, or do you let them live their lives as they always have? And he said, even on their census, you had a choice, Jewish or Polish. You couldn't, there was no way. So he said he didn't even know how many Jews there were in Poland. There's no way for him to sort that out.
Right.
His answer was, hopefully in the future we'll have more.
Right.
A very interesting perspective.
So I think the Chabad perspective has always been brush off the schmutz to reveal what's already deep within there.
Talk about this. Yeah, diamond in the rough.
Diamond in the rough, right? And I think if you know that that the diamond is there, that's what makes the whole process easier. If you know that the diamond is there, number one, this is a diamond. You have a motivation to help brush this off because this has a phenomenal value, right? But I know I'm thinking, for example, we're using the example of brushing off. I'm thinking of archaeological digs. You got to be careful. You can mess things up, right? So you want to brush off the schmutz gently and slowly. But I think the bigger part of it is not so much we talking about sur meira la'aseh tov, turn from evil and do good. So turning from evil can be hard. Doing good has its own benefits to it of its own. So if we focus on doing more good, then the other stuff kind of goes on its own. And the example that the Kabbalists have used for centuries is light. If you go into a dark room, you can't shovel out the darkness. That doesn't work. But if you bring in a little light, the darkness dissipates of its own. So the same thing is if we help a Jew realize the diamond that's there, the treasures that are his inheritance, if he doesn't know what it is, if we are able to share that and help that person, enjoy those things, then the rest of the stuff comes automatically. I remember when I went off to rabbinical college, I was only going to do a semester leave. Oh, well. But when I was going for a semester leave, there was all these things I was leaving behind. I mean, I was in college in San Diego, California. I mean,
where the perfect weather is.
Weather and party and beach. And I mean, come on. And I'm going to New Jersey. That's like
time of year in particular.
So, but what I was going for was attractive and exciting. And so I didn't think about the stuff that was being left behind. It was not relevant. It was the stuff that was drawing me forward. And the other stuff was just left in the dirt. So I think same here. And this is why the Rebbe has shluchim all over the world on all the street corners, saying, are you Jewish? You want to put on tefillin? You don't like Shabbos candles?
I can tell you when I do good things, I feel better than when I do bad things. Matter of fact, I try not to do bad things because I don't want to feel like that. Yeah.
Even those things that have that momentary excitement, but then it passes and then you think reflectively, like, that was stupid. Like, what was I thinking? I couldn't have been thinking. I wouldn't have done it.
I mean, we all three of us have the benefit of years. So it's easier to make those good decisions now.
We also have, what is it? My son says, you can't grow old and wise if you don't start off young and foolish.
There you go. Yes.
So we made those mistakes, and having made those mistakes, now we can move on, right? Yeah. So as wrapping up the class tonight, I think that the bottom line we're coming down to is that every Jew is a gem, a diamond. And the godliness is the part that's natural, and all the other stuff is environmental circumstances that have led us foolishly away from things we don't really want to be doing. And if we would simply do more of the good stuff, then the other stuff falls away and it just dissipates and reveals the natural person who we really are. And so we talk about a positivity bias. When we look at each other, if we see the diamond, regardless of other things that might get in the way, if we see the diamond, it's easier to connect and it's easier to think positively, even in most challenging circumstances. And
Oh, you're talking to a police officer. It's hard to sometimes see the good in somebody. I mean, I always tried to treat people like I would like to be treated, but sometimes the horrific things that they had done, it's just hard to think that they could even have you don't want to take the handcuffs off. You don't trust them.
yeah. And maybe you shouldn't, because they're in, a negative environment. And I have a friend who's a chaplain in a federal penitentiary, and
These were not Jews I'm talking about, by the way.
right. So he's also dealing with folks who are not Jewish, but every human being is created in the image of God.
Well, I always thought that our job as Jews is to be the bearers of Torah to the world. So,
Right. Our job is to bring out that unique godly spirit within every individual by example, by teaching, but ultimately at the end of the day, that is our responsibility.
Amen and a woman. Yeah.